Here we go. Okay, it's working. All right, you're going to use that? Okay. Yay!
Well, hi everybody. Glad to be in another gardening club. Yes, I'm a master gardener, and let me just say, we are master gardeners, but we don't know everything. We just know where to find the information. So if I can't answer a question, speak to me afterwards, and my email address is up here. You can send me an email with your question and stuff. And then there's always the Master Gardener hotline. You can call any day and leave a message or talk to somebody about your gardening questions. So we're going to talk today about grapes and growing grapevines. So I've got a lot of topics to cover. If you have questions, maybe they'll be answered as I talk. And if not, wait till the end because my husband said, too many slides to go through. So I'm going to cover why we grow grapes, wine grapes versus table grapes, the structure of a grapevine, how many grapevines to grow depending on what you want to do, considerations about where to plant, where to buy grapevines, how to plant them, the growing cycle, grape harvest, what you can do with all the fruit you get, because everything will ripen at the same time, and the diseases and some of the diseases and pests, not everything, but and then some more resources. So there's some handouts, printed handouts you can take that has a ton of links or things you can Google if you want more information. Once you start learning about these, just like with winemaking, it's like, oh, there's so much to learn, and you're just researching it, all the time. So, all right. So why grow grapes? Well, personally for me, I knew my kids would grow up and I'd need another hobby, and I love to garden and make things from the garden. So I thought, why not wine grapes? I am half Italian, so, kind of goes along with that. But also, I wanted to cut down on the grass that we had in our yard, and so the Water District has a program where you can take out your lawn, put in drought-tolerant landscaping, and they'll give you, when I did it, $2 a square foot. Now I hear it's more like $3 or $4 a square foot. So, that's pretty good. That helped. When we get to, I'll show you my vineyard, the front yard that we did, I got $2,000. And it cost $3,000 for all the materials. We did all the work ourselves, renting equipment, stuff like that. So mine was drought-tolerant landscaping, and I also have a Spanish-style looking house. So kind of, it's in a neighborhood, so it had to like blend in. So it looks like landscaping that would go with our house architecture. It's also a woody perennial, so it will improve with age, which means you need to pick the right spot and just leave it there. So a lot of things to consider before you're putting it in the ground. It added a lot of interest to our landscape design. And then I can make different foods from, depending on what grapes I'm growing. And also it's a social outlet. I've got 60, 70 vines. So to harvest all those, I usually need some help. And then to bottle the wine and all that stuff, people are always willing to come and help you because they'll get a few bottles of wine, as payback. And I'll order some takeout food, and, it's a big party. So what's the difference between wine grapes and table grapes? Here's just a quick list to go through. Wine grapes are sweeter, and that's because the yeast needs to have sugar to eat to make alcohol. Table grapes are also sweet, so you could taste both of them and say, well, they're both sweet. But if you measured the sugar, and when the grapes are on the vine, and I'm trying to test them to see if they're ripe, I'll use a refractometer. And I'll go through the vineyard and I'll pick one grape from a whole bunch of clusters, maybe get 100 grapes, crush them all in a bag, and take a drop of juice and put it on here, smash it in there, and look under light, and there's a scale from 0 to 30, and it will tell me what the sugar level is. So for making wine, red wine and white wine, there's a range of sugar that you need. And so, if it's really high, then that also dictates the alcohol content of the wine, of what the sugar level came in. So as an experiment, just for my own curiosity, I bought some table grapes, and I knew what my wine grapes were, and the table grapes were lower in the sugar, although they still tasted sweet. So you really do have to have an instrument to measure them in if you're going to make wine. If you're going to grow table grapes, you just taste them and go, yep, sweet enough, time to pick. So wine grapes will produce less, in comparison to table grapes, you'll get less grape clusters, pounds per vine, than table grapes. The wine grapes, in general, might be a smaller grape. It kind of depends on the variety. But now when you go into the store, you look at the grapes and they're like huge. They're like on steroids. So table grapes seem to be getting even bigger now. Wine grapes have seeds. Table grapes don't, most of them. I had a friend who had a Cabernet Sauvignon vine in her yard, and she gave me a jar of grape jelly one day, and it was very crunchy because she used the Cabernet Sauvignon and didn't just squeeze the juice, she just made like a jam with it. So it was interesting. It was still delicious, but it was a little crunchy. You grow wine grapes generally on trellises. There is a style called head trained, and that if you don't want to put up a trellis or something, I say it's easier in that it doesn't need as much structure, but you need to really educate yourself more on shaping that vine. And I'm trying a different style I've got 10 in the head trained style, and I'm still learning because I've seen several different ways of shaping them. So that's a learning curve for me. The table grapes, usually you'll see those like on an arbor or something like that. And then the wine grapes would be maybe harvested a little later in the season because you need to get those sugar values up. And it depends on where you are. I'm in La Costa, and I've worked at a winery in Ramona. 10 degrees difference between the two. And so they'll be harvesting out there, and I haven't harvested anything yet. So you'll want to take that into consideration too when you're harvesting your grapes. And like table grapes, try them out. If they're sour, leave them there. If they're sweet, then you can pick them. So the basic structure of a grapevine, 3 important things. You've got your rootstock down here, and I'll explain why rootstock is important. You've got your graft union, and then this is the varietal that you have, the scion, on the top. And let's see, what else do I have on here? Oh, I'll explain the importance of rootstock is that it's a general practice now around the world because phylloxera, if you ever heard of phylloxera, that happened in the 1800s. And it was an aphid type bug that made its way over to Europe on American vines. And the European and France rootstock, or the vines, had no natural resistance to it. So it decimated over a 15-year period about 40% of the French wine industry, and the French economy took a big hit on that because in the 1800s, that was a big industry. So an American researcher figured out that American vines from Missouri and Texas were resistant to this phylloxera bug. And so they then grafted European vines onto the rootstock, and then that brought everything, back in line after several years. And so now if you buy certified, you can prune a vine, take that, stick it in the ground, root it, and it'll grow. No problem with that. But if you want to keep things for a long time, and the older a vine gets, the better grapes it produces, you'll want to get something that is certified, has no diseases in it, is on rootstock, and that's the best way to go because you're making an investment, especially if you want to plant a number of vines. But you put this in the ground and it's going to grow a long time and give you lots of fruit. So you might as well make the investment for that. If you buy one vine, it's like $12. So, it's not a lot of money, but you want to make sure you've got it on rootstock. And there are several types of rootstock. If you're buying a big quantity of vines, you'll talk to the grower and you'll find out because it depends on what kind of soil you have. If you've got very wet soil, there's one type of rootstock that goes with that. And so that's, a conversation you want to have if you're putting in, a number of vines. And so here's your basic structure. You've got your root system, the rootstock here, the graft union, and the trunk. And this is what's called a bilateral cordon. So you've got your trunk and you got your arms. So you got 2 arms. If you want to have a unilateral, you'll have 1 arm. So you could have a trunk and an arm, and maybe that arm will be a little longer, and then you'll have another trunk. And so you can have it that way. I'm sure you've been to wine country and you've seen all different kinds of trellises, and it depends on what part of the country you're in. Every state in our country has vineyards. I remember moving from Wisconsin to California, and my first vineyard was in Missouri, along the interstate. They had a lot of fruit wines, not really from grapes, but blueberry wine and strawberry wine, stuff like that. But still, there are vineyards growing and different varietals in every state in our country based on the climate, that they have. So in the structure here, once you get the trunk and you get the cordon, you're going to have all the fruit along the cordon here because grapes grow on new wood. That's why they get pruned. So you've got your cordon, and then you're going to have the shoot or the canes coming up. And then the first couple of buds here, you're going to have a bud here. That's where the grapes are going to come. So generally when you look at a vineyard, you've got your irrigation line wire, and then you've got your fruiting wire. And then if it's a typical vertical shoot positioning system, the VSP, you're going to have 2 or 3 double sets of wires, and these canes are going to grow up, and that's just going to hold them like there. Now if you drive up 5 and you go past the agriculture areas where they're growing table grapes, those are kind of like sprawling over like this. So there's a lot of different trellis type systems depending on the grapes you're doing. And with climate changing in Ramona, they've had some really hot weather in the past years, and so they've actually had to change their structure, not in the trellises that they have, but in the hedging of the vines. The vines will keep growing. If you let a vine grow, it's 10, 20 feet. Well, when you've got it growing straight up, you've got to hedge it at the top. So I remember the first year it was like super, super hot, like around the 4th of July, I think it was, and the grapes were not big enough. And so a lot of the vineyards lost a lot of grapes because they just fried them. That 4th of July weekend, it was just so hot. So then they started thinking, well, we need a little bit more shade on the grapes. So they stopped hedging as much, and they let the vines kind of grow over. So it gave the grapes a little shape. So, it's farming. What do you do? You got to adjust. So this is your basic, classic grapevine structure. And the top, once the vines, the canes are growing tall, then that's called your canopy up at the top. Okay, so we've got our structure, and you've got your grapevine. What's the growing cycle? Because this is, once you get past year 2 or 3, it's going to be the same. Every year is just going to be the same. Once it gets established and you've got your shape. So you've got pruning is going to be in the winter time when things are dormant. It's funny, I've got vines in my front yard, and it's funny what people think or what they observe. I don't know. Sometimes they think I replant every year, or what happened to your vineyard? It looks like it died. I said, no, it's just dormant. It's just saving up energy for next year. So it's a real education. I'm out in the front yard working all the time, and it's a good conversation thing. Yeah. Well, actually, I do write up things and laminate them and put them on one of the posts to let people know what's going on, and they stop and read them and stuff, and it's interesting for everybody. So in the beginning of the year, and particularly because we're Southern California, so spring comes early, so around March, April, stuff starts budding out. If you were in Michigan, it's a whole different story. So, and even Northern California. So for me, January through March is when I'll start pruning. And then, let's see, March, April, May, you're going to start getting bud break. And the thing is, on the trunk and on the cordon, there are buds hidden everywhere. So I'd say don't be afraid of your grapevine. If you cut something wrong, okay, next year it'll come back. These things grow like weeds. So don't be afraid. Don't think you cut something. You can cut something really wrong, which I did the first time. I started with table grapes. And I put them in a flower bed that didn't get much water and stuff. And these things grew like crazy. And they were, Thompson Seedless or something. We got a ton of grapes. And then I thought, well, I'm supposed to be doing something else with these. And I'm Googling and going down rabbit holes. And then I drove my kids out to the Wild Animal Park, and we went past Orfila Vineyards. And so I thought, oh, look, they cut everything off. And so I just pulled over and I took a little closer look at that. I've got to cut everything off of those vines. So I went home and I cut everything really close. And what I didn't realize is I cut next year's bud growth off. So then the next year I didn't get any grapes. So you've got to leave a couple of buds on there. And this is where more education comes in. You know, you got to kind of read up on that or take a class or two like that. But the buds will start swelling. And the spring is just, I love watching the vineyard because everything goes really fast. You know, you look at the bud one day and then a day later it's, you know, bigger and then it's got a little green coming out of it and stuff like that. So bud break will happen. Let's see, when is that? I've got another sheet that gives the months. But we've got January, February, March, pruning, April, May, bud break. Again in May, you'll get the flowering. And the flowering is, once you start getting more leaves on the cane, you're going to have what comes out like, it looks like the cutest little grape cluster. This little green thing that looks, you know, tiny, tiny little grape cluster. Well, that's not the grapes. That's going to flower, okay? So you get these little, what looks like a grape cluster come out, and then they get a little furry because the flowers are coming out. And once it flowers, then you're going to get fruit set. Then the berries come out from that. And they're self-pollinating, so you don't have to worry about a lot of bees or anything like that. The fruit set will happen, and then the grapes, you know, June, July, the grapes are growing. They're all green, even if they're red grapes. And when they start turning color, the red grapes start turning color, you're going into veraison. That's the ripening. When you have white grapes, they're still going to be green, but they get a little bit more translucent. So this is the first year that I have my white grapes, and so I'm learning, you know, they don't quite look ready, and I tasted them now, they're not even sweet. And so I just let it go a few more weeks, and then they change a little bit more translucent. So I think red grapes are easier to detect when they're ripening. So veraison will start end of July, August, September, and now everybody is finding with climate change and our temperature changes, things are ripening later. We used to be we'd harvest in August in Ramona, and then all of a sudden we're in September, and one year was early October. So, you know, it depends. If we've got May gray, June gloom at the coast, which I have to deal with, and then sometimes July is cool, and this I consider was a cool summer. So I haven't even started harvesting yet. I think Monday my white grapes are ready, and so we're going to start harvesting. But the red grapes, you know, still need to go about 6 bricks on the sugar. So it's going to be a while before I do that. So once you determine that they're ripened, then it's time for harvest. So this is the general schedule that you go through every year. How many grapevines to plant? Well, that depends on what you want to do. If you want to make wine, you're not going to get much out of one, you know, vine. I put down here, if you're only going to plant 8 to 12 vines, 4 to 6 vines for that much, just buy a wine kit, you know, because it's a lot of work. If you're doing a little bit or you're doing a lot, it's all the same steps. Yeah, so if you want to make wine, then you need to, one grapevine yields in a wine variety 10 to 14 pounds on a vine. 8 to 12 pounds of grapes will produce like 3 bottles or half a gallon of wine. That's a lot of work. Plus, generally you have 5-gallon carboys, and so you want to be able to fill that whole thing because you don't want air in there. Once the wine's made, it's going to oxidize if there's air. So you've got to be able to fill your containers enough. My yard will get about 500 pounds of grapes, and so that will give me 150 bottles of wine. Legally, you can make 200 gallons. Back from Prohibition days, that was the law. So you can make 200 gallons of wine yourself. You can't sell it, but you know, that's plenty for you to drink, parties, gifts, you know, put in competitions, all kinds of stuff like that. And that's a nice hobby. So I would say, unless you want to really get into making a lot of wine, and you love gardening, you know, plant enough vines to make it worth it, or just buy the wine kits. And then the thing is, if you plant your yard and you only have one variety, you get kind of tired of that wine. So you could sell it to somebody, you know, get it to somebody, or trade grapes with somebody like that. But if your objective is just to make grape jelly, have grape juice, eat fresh grapes, make raisins, I don't know what else you would do with them, then, you know, you can plant one vine, or you could just plant a few like that. So you're going to get more yield on a table grape vine too. You can see that wine grapes are generally smaller and table grapes are bigger there. Okay. Whoops. I think I skipped a slide. Okay. Considerations for where to plant. Make sure your vines can get 8 hours of direct sunlight. They need the sunlight and good airflow. Depending on where you are with the county, in the coast, I have a big problem with powdery mildew, so I have to deal with that every year. And the powdery mildew is a factor more of temperature rather than moisture. So at the coast, we're generally, you know, it doesn't really get 90 and above, you know. I just will always remember 2014, the month of May, it was 100 degrees at the coast, like all month. I didn't have any powdery mildew because it will kill it if it gets above 90 degrees. And you want to have good airflow wherever you put your blocks of vines too. You want to have good drainage and have your vines on a drip system. So in areas of the country where they have rain throughout the year, you know, they might not have an irrigation system, but in Southern California, you know, we do. So check your average rainfall in your area. And then you want to consider what pests or diseases you might have. My biggest thing is powdery mildew. I did get Pierce's disease and had to take out my first set of vines, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And if I'd have known about that and I'd wanted to spray or put something in the irrigation system, I could have saved the vines. But, you know, I was new to it. I didn't know what this little pesky bug was flying around. And then I found out when the vines were all infected. So I don't have a problem with squirrels. I know in Ramona, even though they netted the vines so the birds wouldn't get to the grapes, squirrels would get in there, and then you've given the squirrels, you know, more support to run through the vine because you got the netting up, and they'd eat all the grapes. So they're gophers, you know, so you just got to know what's in your area. And yeah, but the bird netting, for me, it's helped. The other thing you can have are bees, and there's bee netting, which is smaller, so the bees don't get through there. Yeah.
Why don't you want bees to go in there?
The bees don't puncture the grapes, but if a bird would puncture it, then the bees go in for the juice. Yeah, and then they ruin them. Other considerations. So you want to analyze your soil. What kind of soil do you have? Clay, decomposed granite. I've got clay where I am. Up in Ramona, the AVA in Ramona is similar to the Rhone Valley, so they are decomposed granite. That's why they have a lot of Rhone varietals up there. In my yard, this is my front yard in La Costa, I found when I started planting, I've got 5 different blocks. And so I didn't put them all in 1 year, over a period of 5 years. The first block was at the top of my yard. My whole yard kind of sloped, so I got good drainage. But there's a layer of hardpan about 2 feet down. So we had a 2-man auger, and I've got 2 sons and a husband, and on my birthday and Mother's Day, I can have them do anything I want. So I said, I want 12 holes to put in a vineyard. So we got a 2-man auger, and they dug me 12 holes, but that auger would not go through the hardpan. And you can't even soak it. I put some water in there, I thought, oh, I'll soak it, and no, it's like a bowl. I actually had rabbits in my yard, and a little bunny fell in and drowned in there. But so that was the summer. I had a couple summers of, you know, heavy equipment with the digging bar, and built up my muscles. And I broke through that hard pan because the roots on a grapevine go 20, 30 feet deep, and they've got a big tap root, so they're going to go down. That's why they're a good drought-tolerant plant once they get established. So if you've got a hole down there, you know, something that can't get through, I kept telling my neighbor that across the street, and he'd put in these citrus trees, and I said, you got to break through that, and they'd always die. So
How deep was that hard pan?
it was probably about 4 inches or so. Yeah, it took a lot. So then when we did our front yard, we rented a skid steer with an even bigger drill. And I know, and we're on a slope. I kept thinking, oh, my husband's going to tip this thing over. And I thought, well, the neighbors are going to think we're nuts. We're digging all these holes with all this equipment. Then I put some gypsum in it, and I filled it back up. And it's like, we dug holes in our yard, and we filled them back up. Okay. There used to be a guy in my folks' neighborhood in Milwaukee who thought there was treasure buried in his yard, and he was always digging holes, you know, so I thought, okay, they're going to think we're nuts. But eventually when we put everything in, then they figured out what we were doing.
Will the gopher, like I have mine in a pot, and I know it went through because I couldn't get the pot out. Will a gopher wreck it if it eats the taproot that goes through the pot?
It goes that far.
Yeah.
We're in big pots.
Yeah, I think so. You know, gophers are a problem in Ramona, and Norm, the co-owner of Hatfield Creek, you know, he was always trapping gophers. Yeah, they were no good for the vineyard.
Go up to where the pot hit, and the roots in the pot. The
Will be
gopher
good.
yeah.
Right, but the taproot's gone.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the life, you know, kind of like the lifeline. Okay. So considerations of where to plant. If you want to plant a number of vines, like I've got one block, I've got 2 rows with 6 vines each. That's an area, so that's this part here. That's an area of 10 by 5. It's a little bit close in between there, but you got to work with the area you've got. Then I've got head trained, which is here in my front yard on either side of my driveway. And so each head train would take a 4 by 4 kind of section in general. And if you want to do an arbor, I've got a little arbor, so I've got a couple of vines on each side, and then they kind of grow up. So the arbor trellising, you know, I just kind of wing it. It starts growing, and I just kind of weave it through there. And so that, you know, that could be an easy kind of trellis system, you know, for you to do. So where do you buy these grapevines? There are lots of places locally, or you can send away from them. I've seen them at Home Depot. I've got a picture of what they, generally January through March, they'll have it like when bare root roses are out, then you're going to have your grapevines out. City Farmers. You'll find some wine varieties there. They've got, that's an awesome, I've been to the City Farmers, love it. You can buy fruit trees there with 3 or 4 fruits grafted on it already. I mean, it's a great place. Or I've always bought my, since I've been getting larger quantities of vines, Nova Vine is a big wholesale nursery. And several years ago they started Nova Backyard. So they're in Santa Rosa. But I ordered them, and they ship bare root. I think I might have even gotten some green potted. So if you're really anxious for things to be taking off, if you can buy green potted vines, you got a 1-year head start. And as a comparison, I bought both, and I remember I had some green potted left from one order, and then I had to order some more that were the bare root, and the green potted they just took off because they'd been growing already. So Nova Backyard, and the handout I have over there has all these links in it. You can order from there, and they'll ship things down to you. Plus, you can call them and talk to them, and they're full of information. Here's at Home Depot. You can buy all kinds of table grapes, and this was the local one in Encinitas. Bare root. Didn't see any green potted. But if you go to City Farmers, everything there was in pots. So if you're really anxious, buy them already, you know, planted in something. These were the local table grapes that Home Depot had, and so they're about $11. And even when the easiest way to do it is if you make friends with a local vineyard or winery, and you can order through them, and then you'll get a wholesale price if you order through them. So they might need to be bumping up their order, I mean, to get a better price, but they don't really need that much. So if you come in and you like the grapes that they grew, you know, you could add to their order, and that's one way to do it too. So how do you plant the grapevines? Okay, this is just a picture of, here's the rootstock, the graft union, and the scion up above there. It's got a bamboo stick. This one looks at least a couple years old, but I still have the bamboo in there for support. This is my irrigation wire and my irrigation tubing. And there's no drip head around here because this isn't the first year. I'll show you later what you do the first year compared to the second year. But the irrigation is low down here, and then it's supported by the wire. So you're going to dig a hole about 8 inches wide to a depth of 8 to 12 inches. You just, you take that dirt out with your post hole digger, and you put your rootstock in there. The graft union should be above ground, and then you refill it with the dirt, center it in there, put your bamboo stick in there, and tie it up, tap down the soil. And I would say have your irrigation set up beforehand, because the first year, it's a new plant, it needs a lot of water. As years go on, you're going to move those drip heads away from the trunk to about a foot on either side of it, so that then the water is going to make the roots kind of spread out a little bit. But you want to get that irrigation because you need to deep soak things. Especially when the roots start growing, you want to deep soak so the water really goes down there. So you're going to tie the trunk to the bamboo stake, or if you're going to do a head trained, I use a rebar, and so you get like a 4-foot rebar, and you're going to dig your hole, you put your vine in there, and you put the rebar in there, and then you, with the green gardening tape, tape it up like that. So that's all the support you need for that. So it's like the easiest way to do it without doing a trellis, but you need to learn more about the pruning and the shaping of that vine. So, there's pros and cons to it. And then after it's done, you're going to put a grow tube around it. Now, I'd say Grangettos and Escondido is, at least in North County, is a good place to get, because they've got posts and wire and all the drip heads and the grow tubes, and they've got more advice on vineyards and things. So that's where I get all my stuff. So here's like a 1-year vine. I just planted it, so I've got the drip head right where that new vine is. And the thing is that in the second year, when you put in your tubing and your drip head, you're going to want an extra foot or so of tubing, because the second year you're going to pull that tubing over a foot. And so this is going to move over a foot, and then you're going to put another drip head over there. So the second year you're going to add a drip head. So now you've got your vine here, the trunk, and you've got a drip head here and a drip head here. So that helps the watering. So that's just in the first year. And so the first year is pretty easy. You've got your vine planted, you got your irrigation, you set that up, you like irrigate, it's 1 gallon an hour maybe, twice a week. You let it drip for an hour, and that's pretty good. So the vine is going to just start growing up. So you just let it grow out of that grow tube and, have at it. Because the thing in the first to the third year, you're developing roots. That's the important thing. You got to get a good root foundation. So you're not going to be picking grapes. You could pick them in the third year. Fourth year is best. But, okay, so the growing cycle, year 1, you're going to plant January through March. And then it's going to be unstructured growth through the grow tube because you're developing the root system. The second year, you're going to sort of start pruning it. I mean, not what you'll do for the rest of the life of the vine, but the first year you're still developing the root system, but you're going to start shaping it. And I've got another rudimentary picture that I drew that'll explain that more. But you're going to cut, the grow tube is going to have this vine coming way out, and you're going to cut it way back to about 2 buds. And if there are any fruit clusters that come out, you're going to cut those things off. And then if you've got issues like powdery mildew, you're going to start spraying when you start pruning. Okay, so here's my picture. I couldn't find anything already published. But this is the first year. So you're planting your rootstock. I've got my soil here. This is the irrigation line, and this is my fruiting wire. So I've got my little grapevine, the grapevine here, and I'm going to put my grow tube around that, okay? So in that first year, as it progresses, the roots are getting bigger, and it's growing, growing, growing. So this is a whole year's worth of growth, okay? And so then the pruning, you plant it in January through March, and then next year, January through March, is when you're going to prune. And so this trunk will have gotten, you know, pretty tall. So you're going to cut it back to close to the fruiting wire, and you're going to leave 2 buds. Because from those 2 buds, you're going to get growth, and then you're going to, if you're going to do the bilateral cordon or the unilateral cordon, then you're going to lay that down, and they're pretty limber, especially when they're young. Even if they break off, it's okay. They keep growing. There's lots of buds in there. And so you're going to lay it down, and then as it lays down, you know, things grow towards the sun, so everything's going to, I mean, you'll still have something that'll grow up underneath, just pick that off. And you're still going to have things growing on the trunk. You want to pick that off. But the second year is when you're going to start your shaping. And then that's when you're going to move, here's the emitter in the first year. Then you're going to move the emitter left and right. You're going to have 2 of them right there. So probably the first and second year is really important for getting things established. And if there's any little grape clusters start flowering, you know, take those off. So here's the second year, your bilateral, the 2 arms, unilateral is 1. And head train, this is one style. There's another style called the wagon wheel that I did the first time. If you see some other pictures, there's some where you've got the trunk, and then it's got a spur coming up here, and a spur coming up here, and a spur coming up here. So I haven't quite decided, when I prune this winter, I'm going to work more on the shape of it. But I need a little bit more education on that, because there seems to be a lot of different styles. When I was in the south of France, they had a lot of head train vines, and they're really low to the ground. So, you know, if you travel around a lot, you'll see a lot of variations and things. Everything produces grapes, but, you know, it just depends. And take into consideration, you know, what it's going to do on your back. You know, if you're going to be bending down a lot, that's going to be really hard on your back when you're harvesting. So you'll see some vineyards where the fruiting wire, you don't even have to bend down. It's right there, you know. So for small systems, everything is, you know, hand done. So in the third year, still developing the root system, you can continue to train it, and you can cut the fruit off again. But this time now, you've got, let's see, you did the vertical shoot positioning system and your canes are growing up. Now you're going to have to start hedging at the top. You don't want things to get, it'll be a jungle in there. And this year, these vines that I'm still learning about, every 2 weeks, we had to go and cut everything from the top, just cut it all off. And when you think about it, once you get into grape production, you don't want all that energy going into this massive vine, you know. So you want to, you know, save that energy for the grapes. And so the new vines that I have, they put out grapes at the fruiting line, and then they just keep putting out grape clusters. So I've learned this year, okay, next year I've got to not just hedge, I've got to cut all these other extra clusters, because those will never ripen, and I need that energy to go into the quality of the grapes that I want to pick. You need like 10 to 12 leaves per cane for photosynthesis, and there'll be plenty of leaves, on the cane. Continue with your watering system and any disease and pest control that you do. And then in the 4th year and beyond that, then you're into your fruit production. You're going to continue to hedge the vines, do your irrigation, your disease and pest control, and then you're going to get into when do I harvest these things. So for red grapes, you're going to use your refractometer. You want the bricks to be about at least 23. White grapes, I think I was reading now, maybe it could be about 18, 19 bricks. And so you're going to test that with that refractometer device. Okay, so just in summary, January through March, you're going to prune back to 2 buds because grapes only grow on new wood. Continue, so that my way of combating kind of like more organically is to do a combination of sulfur and horticulture oil. And so as soon as I start pruning, then I start spraying. So I've got a backpack spray, a 5-gallon backpack sprayer, and I mix up the sulfur. You buy it at Armstrong's, it mixes with water.
Right after pruning?
Yeah, once I prune, then I start spraying. And that's the easiest because there's nothing on the vines. It gets harder as they grow, and then you got to spray more. But I start then with the sulfur, and then I wait 2 weeks, and then I do the oil, and then I back and forth. And I have to look into it a little bit more. Some will say if you stick to just that regimen, the vines will get used to it, or the powdery mildew, will be resistant to it. So maybe you could substitute something else for the sulfur. You'd have to research, what that might be. But so far, the first year I didn't know about that. I thought I had grape clusters from a distance, and then I went to harvest them, and they were all hollow because the mildew splits the grape, the juice comes out, it dries out, and you got nothing. So it's very disappointing. But then once I started doing the sulfur oil every 2 weeks, I haven't had a problem with that. And you can also tell if you've got the mildew. The cane will get, instead of being green, it'll kind of get a blotchy brown spots on it. And so post-harvest you can see, that you had powdery mildew too. March through May you're going to have bud break, flowering. And so if this is a year you're going to be using your fruit, you're going to want to maybe go through and thin the leaves along the fruiting wires so that you get a little more sun in there. Not so much that you get sunburn, but it maybe will depend on the direction of what rows you have on how much sun they get in the morning or the afternoon. If it's more in the afternoon, maybe don't thin as much on one side. But you'll want to thin some leaves. So there's a little bit, and it depends on the variety you pick and how vigorous growers they are. In June, when they start to change color, you want to drape them so that the birds don't get to them. You're going to continue with your spraying, and that continues through July, and then August you're going to start testing for the sweetness. And so September, October now, I'd say you can start harvesting, and you don't need very much. A pair of gloves, a pair of clippers, a nice bucket, and you lift up your netting and you go in and clip all your grapes. So it's best to harvest grapes when it's cool in the morning, and particularly if you're going to make them into wine or something. But all your grapes are going to ripen at one time, so kind of think ahead. What am I going to do with all these grapes? Do I have enough refrigeration to keep them cool, or am I going to dehydrate them, or what am I going to do? So you got to do a little bit of thinking ahead. So September, October you're going to harvest, and then the San Diego Master Gardeners now has a food preservation committee, and if you get on their website you'll see when they have some classes. So they'll give you best practices for grape jelly or raisins or anything else you want to do. If you're winemaking, then you get into destemming and crushing and making your wine. That's a whole nother topic. But post-harvest, once the grapes are picked, you're going to want to continue to water them, because now you're going to be setting up for next year's growth. So just because they look kind of dead, they're still living. And then that's the time to repair anything in whatever trellis system you set up or things like that. So the joke is that winemakers and grape growers take vacation, after the harvest, after the wine's put to bed. That's the only time they can go on vacation. So use the fruits of your labor. You can get fresh juice, you can make jelly. Homemade raisins are just awesome. And if you're thinking about going into winemaking, this book, The Home Built Winery, is the guy shows you how to make just about everything you would need for a small home-built winery. I mean, a destemmer crusher is powered by a power drill. It's got some really cool stuff. And we actually used one of his, whoops. I guess there's a problem going back. That's when it won't go back if I press that one. Oh, I wonder. No, doesn't go back. No. Well, that other slide just showed my harvest. I had
It was the best slide,
all my
wasn't it?
grapes. Yeah, I showed all my hard work.
That's,
Okay.
it was the best slide. We're going to get it back.
The one real important one.
Wow, that's so strange.
It seemed to work when we were setting it up.
Yeah.
Start over and go.
Oh, we're 33 of 49, if you long way. So that was my old way. I would do it in my garage. This is my new, I called it Mom's Vineyard, and that was the whole family voted. You do all the work, it's Mom's Vineyard. So that's what I put on my label. But we remodeled our house, and the thing was that the first time I made wine, I took classes at Maricosta College. And Jim Hort from Hort Winery in Temecula was the teacher. And so we went to his winery, we picked the grapes, we processed everything there, and then we took our 5-gallon carboys home, and we kept it at home until it was ready to bottle. And so in the meantime, we didn't have air conditioning, and we had a Santa Ana, and it was 90 degrees in the house, and the wine went bad. Okay, so that taught me I need some refrigeration. And even a whole house air conditioning system wouldn't be enough to keep the wine really cool. So when we remodeled, we redid the general area of our floor plan, and we had room to make a winery. So I have a wine cellar with a refrigeration system in the attic, its own separate just for this room. And I can keep the ambient temperature at 65 degrees, and there's a wine bottle with water in it that has the thermostat probe, and so the liquids in there are at 55 degrees. And it's dark. So you need coldness and darkness. And I've got my workbench all set up, so it's a lot easier than have it in the garage, move the cars out, and then set everything up, It was an awful long day when I would work in the garage. And then the whole neighborhood could see what I was doing because the garage door was up. But, so now I've got my own little winery at home with a lab bench. And this was the setup that we had in the garage in this cabinet. This cabinet was as big as 2 pieces of plywood. That was the doors, and it was all insulated, and we put a room air conditioner in it. So that was from the Home Built Winery, and this is the way he had the shelves. So the shelves were slanted, so you could do a gravity racking when you take the wine from here and put it in a clean bottle, and then you leave the sediment on the bottle. That's how you rack red wines. Since then, I've gotten a pump, which makes it easier, but it's a really cool system, and it's big enough capacity, and then bought some wine racks for bottles of wine. So pests and disease, let's talk about the messy part of it. This website for the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Integrated Pest Management is the place to go for information on pests, disease. They've got all the information on table grapes, wine grapes, everything listed there. And it's all science-backed research, which is what Master Gardeners promotes. So that would be your best place to go. And if you can't find it there, then, talk to some more gardening experts. Like I said many times, my issue at the coast was powdery mildew. Don't seem to be getting those hot Santa Anas anymore. I don't know where they've gone, but
Not over yet.
yeah, it's not over yet. But the grapes will be harvested by then. I need it sooner, and I need some temperatures sooner in the year. But you get a jump on that soon enough, and that's okay. And I would always mix up so much that then I'd have stuff left over after spraying the vines. So then I'd spray the whole garden. So the tomatoes did well, and the squash did well, and everything. Nobody had powdery mildew because I just sprayed everything. But it's, natural, so then you have to keep repeating it. This is what Pierce's disease is. And it's a little bug that has a bacteria that will infect the vine, and then it closes up the xylem, the main watering system in the plant, and over several years it'll die. And so once you get it, you have to pull the vine out.
Also a host for that?
Yeah, it's
So you can't interplant it with a orchard.
yeah, you shouldn't have citrus next to grapevines, although in my yard, one of my blocks, there's a lemon tree here and there's an orange tree over there.
right.
But for I know people that are in the vineyard industry, and there'll be somebody that has a vineyard, and then there's a citrus right next to it.
Yeah.
So, like I said, there are sprays. I just didn't want to do that. But this is the vector for the disease, and the foliar you could spray is not beneficial to other insects, and you could put it in your irrigation system. I just didn't want to do that, so I pulled those vines out. So I had some Cabernet Franc and Tannat red varietal, which now every time I open up a bottle of red, the Tannat, it's like, oh, this wine aged so well, but I don't have those vines anymore.
Oh,
Yeah. And so these are some of the signs where you'll get, this was in the spring. The leaves would look scorched in the spring when they should all be green. And then you'll get on the branches there uneven lignification. So, it kind of moved through the vineyard from one spot. Afterwards, in hindsight, you're going, oh, that's what those bugs were. And they were over there, and now they're over here. So I did have it. I was able to catch one of the bugs when I was getting some leaf samples, and I took them when the Department of Agriculture would analyze things for you for free. I took them there, and they verified that I'd had Pierce's disease. And it is prevalent in Southern California. So it's something, you're going to make that investment, you got to think, how am I going to treat that? So to eradicate it, I remove the vines. You don't have to, you can replant the next year because it's not in the soil, it's in the vine. And then when you replant, only get certified materials. Now, subsequently, I went to a seminar at UC Davis on vineyard issues, and they were just coming out with 5 varietals that they developed that were Pierce's disease resistant. So they got 3 red and 2 white varieties. And they are a combination of, the white that I have is Cabernet Sauvignon. I mean, this just blows my mind on plant chemistry or whatever you call plant botany. Cabernet Sauvignon is a red grape. And then it was Carignan, which is another red grape, and Chardonnay. And 12-14% of something else they didn't name. And that made a white grapevine. And so then the red that I have are those 3 grapes plus Sylvaner, which is another red. And so you've got white in there, and it still made a red vine. So bravo to them that they came up with this. And at first it was hard to get them because all the bigger vineyards were buying them. But I got them through Nova Backyard. And I had to take what white and what red they had. I couldn't be too picky. But the white's supposed to be like a Sauvignon Blanc, and the red looks beautiful. The color's really deep, so I think I'm going to like that. So that was my solution, just trying to be more environmentally friendly. Those were the names of the new grape hybrids that came out. And when you think about it, when I present my wine to somebody as a gift or in a competition, I will be the only one in that category. So people will really wonder what it is. So this is bird netting that you would put on once the grapes start ripening. When you plant the young vines, rabbits love the tender trunk, so you can keep those on for several years. If you have a problem with bees, then you'd want bee netting, because bees can get in the bird netting, but the bee netting is much finer. If you've got gophers, I've never had the issue while I've had grapevines, but the gopher hawk is a lot of people have used that. It's I kind of wish I would have had a gopher so I could try it, because it sounds really cool.
They're so much better than
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
the-
You're welcome to come to our place.
We'll set you up.
You can see how excited she is. She got a gopher. And so I've got a lot of resources on the handout, and Wendy will be Karen will be putting this in the newsletter. So lots of things to go down rabbit holes for. And any more questions? Yeah.
So I've had grapevines, just table grapes,
Mhm.
Thompson seedless, I planted years ago, thinking, oh, it's great, when I had my kids and things like that. So they're probably 20 years old. And this year has been the most prolific year ever. I think because we didn't get a lot of rain.
Mhm.
Because last year when we got a lot of rain, not so good. My problem is I get these massive clusters. I mean, they'll be this long.
Yeah.
Of all these grapes, and then some are ripe and some are not. Should I go in there when they're small and knock some of them off? Or
That's something that I've heard a lot from, even from the commercial growers around here, and I've got some of that too. And I haven't picked any of that stuff off. I'm just going to wait till I harvest them, and because you can't really eat those. Although I have neighbors who are from Iran, and this one of the past years, when I didn't have time to go out and pick the clusters, I wasn't going to use them, but I had these really immature grapes. She wanted those green sour things. Yeah, and she used it in cooking.
Yeah.
She squeezed them like a lemon juice. But I've heard that from, nobody seems to have an answer of why that's happening.
yeah, I probably got at least 60 pounds of grapes this year.
Oh, wow.
It was huge. I volunteer at a pantry so I can take them and give them away. And I have lots of neighbors that will take them, so it's great. But yeah, it's 60 pounds of grapes, and it was massive this year. And my grapevines, I'm a terrible gardener. Within the grapevines, there's also, I have on below them, blackberries that just somebody came out of their canyon and we planted them like that 25 years ago or more. And then I also have passion fruit that grow in there.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy. It's just, I figured if I'm going to spend water, I'm going to eat it. So, yeah. And I have citrus. I have a Mexican dwarf lime, pretty close to the vines, not real close, but I haven't had any problems with any pests or anything.
Yeah, they didn't affect my citrus tree at all. The Pierces just went after the grapevines, and that was kind of a shame.
Okay, on my grapes, because it's one plant, the vines were growing really far and long, and I cut them back, but then 5 new vines came off of what I left.
Well, at the very end of a vine is where you're going to get the fastest growth. So you've got the cordon going out, and when you cut the very end, that's where it pushes out a lot more growth. So when you go to prune vines, you'll have the spurs that are coming up in the cordon. You'll leave 2 buds there, but on the end you only leave 1. But that's typical, that they send out a lot at the end, And here's another tip to know if you're watering, if you have to water. So you've got the cane and the leaves on it, and there's a little tendril. There's always a tendril at the end. If the tendril is really long, it's getting plenty of water. So it's just a really good eyeball. If the tendril's short, then it needs more water. And I want to put some tensiometers in because my whole lot slopes a little bit, and I want to see what it's like at the top compared to the bottom. So I haven't done that yet, but I just generally look, am I watering enough? Do I need to change my schedule? What's the tendril say at the end? And that's what, it's an easy thing to do. Yeah. Anything else?
Fantastic. Oh, go on.
I don't know if I missed it, but when did you put in your first grapes?
I started in 2010, and over a 5-year period, we did 12 in 2010, and then I put in another section probably a couple years later, and then maybe about 3 years later, we did the whole front yard. So it was over a period of time, and then
Do you get enough wine to make it worthwhile?
I've made 150 bottles at a time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you've won a week.
And then
That's not even enough for one a day.
and the funny thing is, I'm a lightweight when it comes to drinking wine. My husband drinks it. Yeah, I like wine. So you know, if you're gonna make wine, this tells you it's good enough to drink. If a judge gave you an award, you know, and we had a party once and it was all our wine, and people didn't just take one glass. They went back for more glasses. I thought, okay, it's drinkable. But this is the real validation, you know, and even at competitions, there'll be label competitions, so you can just submit your label, you know. But it's a fun hobby. It's a lot of work, but if you love gardening and making stuff from your garden, you know, nothing's better than that.
I love making stuff from my garden.
Yeah, yeah.
I do it all the time.
Well, one year I even took the wine and I made like Cabernet Franc jelly.
Yeah.
So if you
Wine
have
jelly.
a lot of wine,
I
it's
love
like,
wine
what am I
jelly.
gonna? Sometimes I wake up at night and I go, what are we gonna do with all this wine? You know?
I make lots of wine jelly. It's so easy.
I love
Yeah,
wine jelly.
yeah.
I'll send you a recipe for making vermouth with your wine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right.
Vermouth. Yeah.
All right. So that's my
Okay.
presentation.
Yay! Yay! Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Kathy, take it away.